Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg. I am a mental health advocate in my daily life, and in my professional life, I am a intuitive coach and healer, helping people figure out who they are, why they're here, what's getting in their way, and how to move forward. Today, we are talking to Zach Tidwell, who's joining us from Colorado, where I have always wanted to go, but haven't been yet. Zach, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right. Let's start by learning a little bit about you. Tell us about yourself.
As you mentioned, my name is Zach Tidwell, and I am 29 years old. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I lost all of my sight and hearing in one ear to a suicide attempt on March 31st in 2019. I had to relearn how to do literally everything from brushing my teeth and feeding myself and walking all the way to where I am today, where I ski and rock climb and whitewater kayak and compete in Brazilian jiu-jitsu against people without any disabilities. I'm also a self-taught, award-winning software developer, making the digital world a more accessible place for everyone. As you can imagine, suicide prevention and mental health is also a big part of my life. I actually just got out of a big annual panel that Wounded Warrior Project does and puts out into the world. And I do a lot of public speaking and have a book on the way and all sorts of other stuff.
Ooh, amazing. I'm sure we will hear more about all of those things. Yeah. Wounded Warrior is a great project. If you haven't heard about them, listeners, look them up. They're amazing. Shoot, you said something else and I was like, oh, tell me more. And now I can't, but software developing for accessibility. Awesome. Like even just in the few conversations that we've had, like lining this up, like it really, as an abled person, makes me realize like there's so much missing, out there that like, I have no idea it's not there because I don't need it. So
no one does. And I didn't until I needed it, but I was back in college about, I think about 9.5 months after I shot myself. And my college actually stopped making my course content accessible to me, and it prevented me from being able to continue pursuing my education independently. And so I dropped out of college to teach myself how to code and make some of these solutions. So it's been it's been such a cool path that I never would have ended up on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's wild. Well, good for you. I don't know if I could teach myself coding even if I wanted to.
Yeah.
But all right. I'm sure there was more that you mentioned in that little thing, but we'll get to it. It'll come back up. So let's dive into your story a little bit and go back to the beginning when you shot yourself. What was going on?
As you can probably imagine, there was a path to that point that doesn't just come up out of nowhere. And so that was in March of 2019. In November-ish, I guess it was a little before November, in the latter half of November, or in the latter half of 2017, I was on my second deployment and found out that my wife was having an affair and cheating on me. So that didn't put me in a great place, but I was dealing with it. I came back from that deployment in early 2018 and filed for divorce. And one of the things I was doing just to deal with everything was keep myself very busy. I was a machine gunner in the Marines. Life as an infantryman is extremely busy and extremely demanding. And I just kind of leaned into that in my off time. So it was a lot of time in the gym, a lot of long miles running. And also on the weekends, I was taking my dirt bike out to the racetrack so I could just keep myself busy. And in March of 2018, on one of those weekends, I was actually in a nasty motorcycle accident that left me with a traumatic brain injury. And that really sent me spiraling. It sent me to a point, I became very agitative and impulsive and started making these huge impulse purchases that were entirely out of character for myself and putting myself in dangerous situations. And also, that's when I started to struggle with depression and I couldn't sleep. So I started self-medicating so that I could sleep. And
Right.
I did that with alcohol, which is a pretty common decision, which
Mm-hmm.
but was not the right decision. That is, I think people realize this, but that's a depressant and you're adding, even though it feels good in the moment, like there is a heavy downside on the back end of that. That is, and you kind of, especially in a circumstance like mine where I was avoiding talking about everything because I thought it was weak to speak up. That deficit got bigger and bigger and bigger every time that I was doing it. And I was diminishing my ability to cope with what I was dealing with because I just was putting it off further and further. So that continued through August of 2018. I was honorably discharged. I finished my enlistment and came home to start going to college and pursuing a nursing degree. I was working full time and going to school full time and just keeping up appearances as I got into a worse and worse place. So and through my own inaction, like this is all my fault that I got to that point, but I kept slipping into a darker and darker place. And I tried to counteract that by putting on a facade that I was doing all right. So it's, near the tail end, well, leading up to March of 2019, when I did shoot myself, I was going so far as to, because I had lost interest. I was so apathetic about everything that I enjoyed doing that everything was like pulling teeth. The only things that I was consistently showing up for was school, work, the gym, and drinking. So it's weird how that works, but I was trying to force myself out of the house. I've always been very active to go do the things that I used to love that I wasn't getting any more enjoyment out of because I thought that would help drag me out of that place. So
Right.
I would load my dirt bike up and drive to a racetrack or load all my snowboarding gear up and drive several hours to a ski resort and get there and still not want to be there. So I just kind of sit in my truck for a couple hours before I drove home so that it looked like I went and did those things. Because so everyone around me thought that I was good, and that it caught up with me. And on March 27th of 2019, I decided I was going to kill myself. On March 30th, my parents were visiting me and were in the room where I had just decided several days beforehand that I was going to shoot myself in the head. And I didn't say anything. I just kept up appearances. And I did the same thing the next day. My roommate actually got home early from work and he interrupted me recording a suicide video to my family.
Oh.
I paused the recording, composed myself, and went out to talk to him like nothing was wrong, and then went back in my room and shot myself.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Wow. So wait, how old were you when all this was going on?
I was 21 when I found out my wife was cheating on me, 22 for the motorcycle accident, and 23 when I shot myself.
Wow.
Had just turned 23. Yeah.
Just a baby.
Yeah. A lot of life experience packed
A lot of life
into that.
experience. You were not just a baby, but like it sounds so young. And I know that, life experience in the military does not equate to life experience at that same age as a civilian. But yeah, I mean, also the fact that you were married and getting divorced at that age, you had already experienced a lot. You mentioned, sorry, my brain is on 12 tracks at once here. So I'm going to jump around all over the place. You said you had the motorcycle accident or dirt bike accident. And then you were doing a bunch of impulsive things. Was that because of the brain injury or was that just mental health?
It was the brain injury. I mean, it changed everything for me like that. It was just, and it's very common. It's crazy because I didn't think anything of it. This has all been hindsight. This is 2020. I just thought that, all right, this is what happens when you're 22 and going through a divorce and or 21 and or no, I was 22 at that point. But yeah, I thought that's what was normal. And so I also thought that because just brute forcing my way through things in the Marines had worked really well for me, like I excelled there, that
Mm-hmm.
that would work in this capacity too. And it was very short sighted of me, and I had to learn the hard way apparently. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, you're just like, oh, I guess I'm just acting out and not really realizing that the the injury was making itself known in that way. I had a friend who was in a really bad car accident in high school, and sustained a traumatic brain injury. And I didn't meet her until she was, I don't know, in her 30s probably.
Mm-hmm.
And to most people, she looked fine. She seemed fine, but she had these weird little quirks where her brain just wouldn't brain the right way. And we met for lunch one day and then hugged goodbye. I get in my car, she goes to her car, and then she comes back and she's like, I didn't hug you goodbye. And I'm like, yes, you yes, you did. But I'll give you another one. That's fine. But like,
Yeah.
it's just she would glitch,
Yeah. It's very common.
like that. And so, and the impulsivity and things like that are another way that shows itself. So
Yeah. So is the depression. Like it's
yeah.
really, it's kind of wild. Like with as capable as human beings are, how fragile our brains are.
Yes. Yeah. We should be walking around bubble wrapped all the time.
Yes. Helmets everywhere. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, like, what was the thought process, but there probably wasn't really much of a thought process
Going into the suicide.
leading up to the suicide. It was probably just more of a feeling process.
Yeah. I mean,
all of these things sort of building up upon each other.
So it's suicide is really a problem of despair, and you reach this point. There's part of it definitely, like I said, not speaking up fed into that, drinking fed into that. But on March 27th, when I decided that I was going to kill myself, I was totally sober. No alcohol, no nothing. I was just so, that depression on that level, especially when unaddressed, just takes you to an irrational place. And it's, to put that into perspective, if you really stop and think, all biological organisms on this earth, like your first instinct is self-preservation, second instinct is spread your genes, right? Like I'm oversimplifying, but that is a component that is at play in all biological organisms. Like killing yourself flies in the face of both of those very basal instincts. And so I don't think you're in a sane state of mind anymore. And it's especially that night was the first time that I'd ever mishandled a firearm in my life. And I grew up around guns. I was a machine gunner, so I did guns for 4 years. But that night as crazy as this sounds, I didn't have the thought of, oh, I can't believe I just did that. I need to go get help. I felt relief in that moment. And I say that because I think it speaks to the place that you're in mentally, where it seems so inescapable, which again is crazy to say, because all I needed to do was ask for help.
Yeah.
And so it was that decision was that day, but I don't know if I would have gone through with it, because even though that was in my mind, the day that I shot myself on the 31st, I did have some drinks. I started recording my suicide video and then started drinking so that I would have the courage to go through with it. And so I don't know if that was the straw that broke the camel's back there, or if it just would have happened anyways. But I don't know how speaking up wouldn't have fixed that, or if I'd heard a story like this leading into that, where it would have snapped me out of it. And that's why I try and talk about this stuff so much. Like it really, every time that it actually just happened in that panel with the Wounded Warrior Project, the team members in our little debrief after said that they had one of them specifically had one of their staff members reach out that was listening to that panel and say that, hey, I realize in hearing these guys that I need help and I'm going to start seeking it. I'm not in a good spot. But when I speak to independently on a stage somewhere, like virtually every time that I speak, someone comes up to me afterwards and that same conversation happens where like, this was what I needed to hear to snap out of this and realize that I can't do this on my own.
Amazing.
So I just think it could save a lot of lives, you know, and it's uncomfortable to talk about. I'm not uncomfortable talking about it, but a lot of other people like outside of the space are uncomfortable talking about it.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a lot easier to talk about it, you know, now in hindsight, these are things that happened that I went through. Whereas like in the moment, it seems so difficult.
yeah.
And it doesn't have to be. But so going back, so what happened after you shot yourself? Because you're still here. So.
Yeah. When they took me off of life support, that's when I was actually so out of it that I didn't even understand that this was the case, but I was totally blind and deaf in one ear at that point. I needed to have my face reconstructed and relearn everything like I talked about earlier. And I, you know, it was a long path, but it was 8.5 months after that, I was snowboarding again. Month after that, I was back in college, and 6 months after that, I was back out on my own. And it wasn't, it was not pretty. I was figuring it out because I was determined to not become a victim to my circumstances and turn this into something that could help others. And things were good for a while. I actually went through the worst depression of my life in the beginning of 2021. I was not in a good spot. You know, it was COVID lockdowns and I was hitting winter break at the end of 2020. I just moved into bought my first house and was living in downtown Denver where I didn't know anyone. And so I kind of had to the pace of everything had slowed down to the point where I had to stop or I guess I was confronted with how different everything was for me and how difficult things were and how long it took me to do everything. Like I was burning most of the meals I tried to cook. I'd drop something on the floor and crawl around doing like these face down snow angels to try and find it. And I'd hit it with my hand and send it shooting across the floor somewhere else. I'd be like, damn it. And have to go crawl some more to try and find it. It was stupid stuff like that. And again, it's not rational. I reached this point where I didn't want to be alive anymore. And I knew that it didn't make sense. Like I couldn't put words to why I didn't. I just had that feeling. And I wasn't going to do that again to myself or to my family. And at that time, I was talking to my psychologist once a week and I was terrified to speak up because I thought that was going to get me locked up in a psych ward somewhere. But I knew if I didn't say something that I was going to die. And so I told her and she didn't call the cops on me. You know, I very clearly stated, I don't want to be here, but I also I'm not going to kill myself. And we went from talking once a week to every day and sometimes multiple times a day because it was that bad. It was bad. I still say that it was the worst depression that I've ever gone through because I was actually sober through it and actually having to feel all of it. But I got out of it and that taught me a really critical lesson that is still responsible for why I'm here, because later that year is when my college stopped making all of my course content accessible. So dropped out of college and started teaching myself how to code. But at the same time, I picked up alcohol again, not having realized that I was definitely a functional alcoholic by the time that I shot myself. When I picked it up again, and you hear addicts and alcoholics talk about this all the time, like the addiction doesn't know that you stopped. It picks right back up where it left off, and it usually just gets worse right off the bat. And mine totally did. Like the idea of it being functional was no more. It consumed my life. And so on one hand, anytime I was coherent enough to do so, I was teaching myself how to code, reading everything that I could and trying to code. And on the other hand, I was just getting hammered constantly. So at its worst, you know, I tried AA, I tried outpatient rehab, and then I tried inpatient rehab. And while I was at inpatient rehab, I actually got diagnosed with an incurable genetic disease that is a degenerative neurological disorder. And
oh my God.
it's called Huntington's disease. Have you ever heard
Yeah.
of that?
Yeah, I have.
So I have that. And for people who don't know, the end road of that is it will reduce you to a vegetative state. Like that is the end of the road for you. And then something else like pneumonia or some other infection will kill you. But I learned while I was at inpatient rehab that's what I had. So the wheels came off when I got home, and at its worst, I was going on blackout binges for 2 or 3 days straight, recovering for 2 or 3 days, and then doing it all over again.
Wow.
But that is where I finally started to make progress, because in 2023, I had all of my work was kind of culminating. Finally, I started my first business, and I released this word puzzle game on the 4th of July in 2023 that was called Xanagrams, and it looked and functioned normally for people without disabilities, but was accessible to virtually every physical disability. So if you were legally blind, it would infer from your device settings that, okay, the font needs to be bigger. We need to use high contrast colors and maybe reduce motion of the animation so that it's easier to track with your impaired vision. If you're totally blind, a screen reader could read everything on the screen. And if you were totally blind and totally deaf, you could actually use it with these cool pieces of technology called refreshable braille displays. So you could use my iPhone app with braille, and if you were paralyzed or you had no arms, you could use it with your voice. And people started reaching out to me like, hey man, this is just, you know, kind of tying back into what I had said about what I realized when I hit that really bad bout of depression was like, you have to jump through so many hoops when you have like such a big disability like that, whether it's the blindness, the deafness, or being paralyzed or being an amputee. Like, people started reaching out to me and just saying like, hey, it's nice to not have to take all those extra steps and have something that is actually obviously like purpose built for us. And it's having these impacts on my life. You know, I spend a lot of time at the doctor's office. Now I have something that is not, you know, I can play with my wife, and it's just something that we talk about at night before we go to bed or whatever. And it started kind of like pulling me out of my slump. So before that, I couldn't string together more than 3 days of sobriety, but I got a month of sobriety, and then I fell off the wagon. And then I got 2.5 months, and then I fell off the wagon. And I actually had my last drink in December of 2023. And later that year, actually, it was at the end of the year, that game won 2 Game of the Year awards specifically for all of these accessibility implementations that I had added. And it was like, amazing. I have my purpose. It was so cool. Yes. And so it was just like, I've got my purpose again. I have my identity, because I had lost that after I shot myself. Yeah. I wasn't a husband. When I couldn't do anything for myself, I didn't feel like a man. I was no longer an active duty Marine. And then all of a sudden I couldn't be a nurse anymore. And it was just, so I floundered, and I finally had this. And it's carried me forward from there. I wrote a book last year that I'm working with an editor to get it on the road to publishing. I've taken all of the things that the approaches that I used in that game, because that was kind of a proof of concept for me to make sure that I could do everything, because from entirely blank files all the way through the end of that app, I developed everything, including the visuals. And I wanted to make sure that this was a feasible path for me. Yeah. So I've started a new business and been working on a new solution for the past 1.5 years that is going to have much wider reaching impacts on the disability community than just a word puzzle game. And it'll, just like that first app though, it will also be cutting edge technologies that are available for everyone. Like it will act and behave normally for people without disabilities too. And
amazing.
I've started doing this speaking stuff, and just everything has come full circle for me. And it's been so much work, right? Like early on, I couldn't even talk about my wife's affair without getting sweaty and angry and shutting down. And then it was that way with my suicide attempt for a long time. And
Mhm.
it's
And
been this push.
yeah, it takes practice to talk about these things. And the more we do it, the easier it gets. Um, but I wanted to kind of circle back to what you said there, in that, what really helped you get sober and feel good again was finding your purpose.
Yes.
And it's it's a little cliche, in the social media world to have your purpose and everything, but it's that way for a reason. Like it really is so important. And I think a lot of people who don't struggle with mental health don't really understand how important that is. A lot of people can just go through life, and they go to college, they get a job, they, whatever, they become a doctor because their parents want them to, and they're perfectly fine with that. It's all good. They don't necessarily have this big giant purpose. They don't have their why they're here on this earth, and they don't maybe need it as much. But I think when you do struggle with depression the way that some of us do, that why and that purpose is really what keeps us going.
Yeah. And I think and I'd be curious to hear what you think. I think my thoughts on that are that it's the fallback of when I am at that place where I'm not getting enjoyment out of anything. It is a cause that is greater than I, you
Hmm.
know, like what have you stopped and thought about that at all? Like why you feel that that is more important? Because I think what you said is totally accurate, where like there's a lot of people that are comfortable going through the motions with things. And maybe that's not exactly what you were saying. That's what I heard,
Hmm.
but it's, yeah. Have you stopped to consider why that might be the case?
Um, I just because what you said, because it's bigger than us, and I think depression has us so focused on ourselves and how we're feeling right now, that to have us thinking about the bigger picture. Um, and also, interestingly, sort of connected, is how when you made that game and people were giving you feedback, being like, oh, you really helped me. This is so great. My life is better because you did this. When we have that feedback that we're contributing to something bigger than ourselves, that also helps us feel better and feel more motivated to take part in life.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the same mechanism at play, even with speaking about all this stuff. Like it does. I think some of it is, there's power in owning even the ugly parts of your path, or whatever you want to call it, the ugly parts of your life. And some of it is that, but it is, yeah, it is the hope that, these conversations, kind of like we touched on earlier, will drive someone else to realize, like, all right, I am not headed down the right road right now, and this could go
Hmm.
sideways really quick.
Hmm. Yeah. One of the guests I had on the show, actually, oh, I think his name was Mike. Um, but anyways, he actually decided not to kill himself because of a podcast he listened to. It was totally by
Wow.
chance. Like he just turned it on for whatever reason or something like that, and whatever the topic was he was just like, "Oh, okay." Changed his mind, and now he's here doing great things. So you never know where we're going to hear those messages, whether it's, here on my podcast, if it's hearing you speak somewhere, if it's going to a convention. You never know when people share their stories, what can happen.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, like with him, I guess not. I think I would be curious to know if it was, was it more impactful because it's something he wasn't expecting? And I think this format, I guess outside of that question, I think this format is such a powerful or potentially powerful way to do that, because you're not talking at someone. There's no one's giving a presentation, right? Like it is, you're just laying it out. And so people can take from it what they may and just digest it, and whatever they took away from it as being the most relatable parts. And I think it's that authenticity behind it maybe that opens the door for that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So if you had a piece of advice to give to somebody who was struggling with depression or alcoholism or suicidal ideation, whatever it may be, what would you tell them?
Can I give a piece of advice to that person and to the people who might be surrounding that person who
Absolutely.
are watching them go through it? Okay. If you are that person, I beat the dead horse on this any chance that I can. I skimmed over a lot of stuff because of, the amount of time that we're working with here. But the reason that I am still here is because I spoke up, and I learned, again, that putting in the work does, no matter what the circumstances are, it is that opens the door for things to get better, and they can and will get better so long as you do that. And it's, I already touched on, I used to not even be able to talk about the stuff with my ex-wife and everything else. This has been a lot of work, and it hasn't been comfortable work, and none of it was quick, but I've come out on the other side of it with a greater respect for life, and just this thankfulness to still be here. And I think more resilient on the other side of that, because that is what built up the coping skills for me. And that's possible for you too. You just have to tell someone that you're struggling. Like there's hordes and hordes of people out there in organizations that want to help you, but they can't do that until you ask or just tell someone. And again, speaking up was the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life. And prior to that, I always thought that it was weak, but it is such a ridiculous statement to have, or thought to have. And I know a lot of people do have it, but stop and consider that. Since when have human beings ever considered the hard path to be the weak one? So I don't know why we twist that in our minds when it comes to ourselves seeking help. But if you are that person,
we're not designed to go through life alone, to do things alone. That's just not human nature.
No, yeah, not at all. Absolutely not. And so that's just tell somebody. And it doesn't have to be a professional. Ideally, it's at least someone that you trust. And if you don't have that, call the crisis line at 988. I've called them once before. And during that same rough period between that depression that I mentioned and the picking up alcohol again, like there's been a lot of ugliness in there, and they got me connected with services. There was, again, no cops came and busted down my door, but
correct.
I think on the other side of that, to the people watching you go through it, there's a lot to unpack. I think the warning signs that are talked about in our society miss the boat for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think they are largely inaccurate. And I think that's because there are, in this, when discussing suicide and people going down that path, I think there's two different populations. Both, I'm not diminishing the places that either population go or saying that one needs more help than the other. That is not the case. Everyone needs this help. I'm just saying that I think these warning signs only apply to one side of this. I think there's the population who thinks that they want to die. And I think these are the people who tend to show these overt warning signs that we talk about. The Facebook posts and giving things away and making obscure comments. And I think again, they believe that they want to die, and that comes out as them asking for help without doing it directly. That is what those acts are, and these warning signs are. There's the other side where, like I've harped on, I hid it until minutes before I shot myself. That is not uncommon either. And so the way to recognize that, unfortunately, again, it's a lot of it, like I'm the only one responsible for where I ended up and not speaking up. Like a lot of the times, that's the hard part with this, when people get left behind after a suicide from someone who did hide it until the last minute, is everyone else feels like they're at fault. But like,
Yeah.
you have to recognize that person, and that person, like I'm saying this for me as well, like I had agency in that situation to seek help, and I didn't. And so that's not anyone else's fault. But the way that you might be able to stop someone like that, because even though there's not those overt warning signs, when you know someone well, you can notice a change in their baseline. And it might be them falling into these destructive behaviors, or they're starting to abuse substances and these different things, or withdraw from people. And when you notice that, you have to be willing to ask a very direct, uncomfortable question. And you have to ask them, hey, I'm worried about you for these reasons. You haven't been doing these things that you enjoy. You've also been drinking a lot lately, and you've been very short with me. I'm worried about you. Are you planning on killing yourself or someone else? You have to ask those direct questions. This, are you all right? Or how are you doing?
I'm fine.
Yeah. Everyone says that. That's like a thing in our culture. Like when you ask, hey, how are you? You don't mean that. Like that's just it's a greeting that we use. And so people don't tend to speak up. And again, at the end of the day, that is still on that person when confronted to tell the truth if they are in that place. But
it's a lot harder to fluff your way through a direct question from somebody when you're feeling that way. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask the direct questions and to insert yourself into somebody's life who you think is struggling.
Yeah. And try and be that person that your people know they can call at 3:00 in the morning, and you're going to pick up. And if somehow you missed it because you slept through it, you will call them when you wake up. Like,
and don't make those assumptions that people, they just know that I'm here for them. Tell people, if you ever need me, call me, text me any hour, anytime, any day. I am here for you. I will listen. I won't judge. Be explicit in letting people know that you're there.
And check in on them when you see the changes. Like again, directly. And you may not be worried that they're on the cusp of killing themselves, but again, it's direct. What are you worried about? These are the things that I'm seeing in you. This is why I'm worried.
Yeah.
What the hell is going on?
Exactly. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today, Zach, and for sharing your story and your wisdom and your hope with our listeners. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks for being willing to have the air quotes taboo conversation. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.